Nigeria's Minister of Works, David Umahi, says there is a need for the country to make fresh borrowings to fund its 330 emergency road projects. Now, the Works Minister made this submission in Abuja while addressing a cross-section of the media at an interactive session with contractors and other stakeholders overseeing ongoing road projects in the country. Umahi said the funds appropriated for roads in the 2024 budget would not be enough to meet the urgency of the moment, stating that the president must source funds elsewhere to make the needed impact amidst the increasing need to address the country's infrastructure deficit problems.
It will be very important for the public to know that it is difficult to accomplish most of these roads by mere appropriation. We will be seeking the robust engagement of the public so that to encourage Mr. President to look for funding. And I love what a lot of allies are saying. Say, look, if we're borrowing to do tangible things, which is what Mr. President is doing, it's encouraging. America is owing badly. You know, they borrow to engage in infrastructure. And so if Mr. President is borrowing, is to engage in infrastructure, and the need for the borrowing will be made manifest as far as Minister of Works is concerned. So we are going to be publishing that. We are working on that, and in the next 4 weeks, that is going to be made public, and so that we see the need to encourage Mr. President to go outside the budgetary appropriation and look for money to give to Minister of Works to accomplish some of these tasks. And I feel for, our people, but I also feel more for the president, who is facing all these challenges.
Well, let's have this conversation with Dr. Sam Amadi, who is the director of Abuja School of Social and Political Thoughts and Arise News analyst. Dr. Amadi, good to see you. The issue here first is about fixing our roads and networks, which we have actually seen that the government has started fixing. But the other sore point, perhaps maybe you can explain, expatiate on the issue of borrowing and how it affects a nation as Nigeria.
Well, thank you for having me. I guess the first is that there's a repulsion against borrowing, essentially. I mean, they say he who goes out borrowing goes out sorrowing. But borrowing is part of public finance menu for development. And where people say that America, China, all these great countries are borrowing, but the difference is that America basically is denominated in their dollar. So even though if America wasn't America, the debt profile would basically crash the economy. So it's not a good example. The three issues about the borrowing is first is you talk about cost-benefit analysis. If you look at the DMO Act, okay, that provides clearly about borrowing, and under Buhari, we have not followed the rules and the process. I mean, I remember when there was a massive borrowing under Buhari, and part of it was supposed to go to NTA for some kind of humongous money to digitalize. And so the question is, cost-benefit analysis is, you have to be detailed to say this is what this borrowing will cost us. This is also what it will give us, not just superficial, so, it's going to help us. What does that mean in terms of socio-economic value, okay? So that's one aspect, a real cost-benefit analysis, and of course, sustainability plan. Again, the question then goes back to procurement, costing. And so road infrastructure actually is one of the biggest corruption,
enablers?
Yes, that's really where corruption plays big, because everybody will say, oh, they're doing roads, or they're doing bridges. But the question is at what cost? So that's another issue around procurement, cost for value for money. And the third issue there would be, which roads are you doing? You see, there's a big idea in economic development. People think that infrastructure's contribution to growth is exaggerated. So I give an example. So if you build a road to a place where you're not aligning economic activities, roads to rural areas, very wonderful roads, in 2 minutes they are everywhere. But again, people can't bring food to the market because of insecurity, farming, there's no commercial transaction. And so the danger is, when we talk about the infrastructure deficit, the danger also is to forget the human social infrastructure deficit is higher. So I'm sympathetic to government saying, okay, we're going to borrow to drive up investment in physical infrastructure, but shouldn't we be borrowing also to drive up investment in the real drivers of development?
But are we sure that the minister mentioned borrowing? I mean, is he implying that there's a need for government to borrow? Well, or when he says, look, it's time to look outside of the budgetary allocation, and he said, look, this will go into, you know, emergency roads, 330
He also said that people are saying that if we borrow to finance infrastructure, it makes sense. There's no kidding.
Right.
That 3 ways government can raise
Can
money.
we help the minister and maybe governments, you know, to begin to look in what direction now, outside of the budgetary allocation, should government be looking for funding? Private sector, for example?
No, private sector will mostly fund you or based on also on borrowing, okay? Or what you call corporate social responsibility. I mean, no company will going to fund this level of deficit as a way of corporate responsibility or community service. So either you give the tax waivers, which also constitute, you know, it's a loss of revenue. I mean, when you give tax waiver, you forgo a revenue. And so the implication of tax impact may not be much different. But the key issue here is that most of this infrastructure development will be too borrowing. And probably, if you look at the GDP, debt to GDP, I think we still have, we have some room, but then don't forget that room, if you look at devaluation and the impact, that room is narrowing down. I think we're getting about 40 to 50%, and the threshold is around 50 or thereabout from the World Bank. Okay, now, so that's one issue. Then you look at the key issue, which is debt services. So when your revenue is not even enough to service a debt, and then you are in a very difficult situation because you are not borrowing your own currency. So you are borrowing in a different currency, unlike the US. Again, you are also making it difficult for you to engage in recurrent and other investments. So what I'm saying is that, yes, we may have to borrow, but first let's do the basic things, identify these routes, and ask ourselves, in comparative terms, for example, we're talking about minimum wage now, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about education. In comparative terms, are we balancing this community physical infrastructure with community social infrastructure? And then again, I would say also that you do these roads at cheap in terms of looking at how to reduce contract cost is high in Nigeria, and people have observed that, not just because of the materials we use. I wouldn't even, some terrain are not difficult. So you can see that you can actually, if you cut down on the cost component of per kilometer of road, you are doing more road with less. Right. So I see that everybody say, oh, infrastructure. So I'm saying cautionary tale. One is cost efficiency.
These are emergency roads, which means I mean, a lot depends whether development, whether it's rural roads and what have you.
No, we're not criticizing them now. We don't know the roads. We're saying, in trying to think about borrowing, how do we build up our debt profile? We build up by feel-good factors. We also needed to do roads, we need to do bridges. Yeah. So we are saying that it's not enough to say we need. See, Nigeria has huge infrastructure deficit, and it has impact on economic development. Yeah. But we are saying that it shouldn't be. It could also actually be an excuse for building the economy. We've seen the states. Most of the debt. Look at what's going on in Kaduna State, by the way. It's debts. Those money were not stolen and swallowed. Yeah. They were ostensibly used to fix infrastructure. And the question is, in terms of comparative value, maybe you fix the infrastructure and you don't fix the components that align for economic growth. So I say balance it, again, be cost efficient.
As we try to balance this, because one key thing here has to do with what we do with such monies. And again, we also have to look at ourselves. Time and again, the minister has given contractors ultimatum to move to site to fix things. Otherwise, such contracts will be revoked. Dr. Amadi, let's be honest, is Nigeria really ready for some kind of projects? For instance, we keep talking about what we see in America and what we see in Europe. But when we come back here, some of these roads are tolled. So if we come back home and we say, okay, we want to give you a semblance of what you've seen abroad, and we tend to toll these roads, do you think some Nigerians will pay? Keep in mind, it's the same thing that we're having with the call them wonder banks, because Nigerians don't like to pay back loans as individuals. And that is why when they go to these same wonder banks, they take the monies and they bolt away. So it's almost the same thing. So how do we start having this? It will look like a kind of orientation to the extent that Nigerians will know that, look, anytime you ask for something good, you have to pay for it.
Yeah. Good. Let me answer you. See, our idea about governance is technical and not even social. For example, a government main work is to change attitude, mobilize people. You see, development is an attitude. You have to change attitude. But you change it by modeling. I'll give you an example. Look at what Kenya did when the president responded and sacked the cabinet. Look how he cut his own cost. Now, those costs might not amount to much in terms of what they're looking for. But symbolically, it begins to retool. So leadership in Nigeria has been deficient in doing the social mobilization and attitudinal change. It's a key work. Again, you talk about this attitude of tolling. It's important that we also know that we have to pay for certain things. But I think that development is in stages. I would prefer that you make rural areas, major roads, good enough. I'm not keen about a New York kind of road in Nigeria. I want appropriate. See, development is appropriate.
But if we can achieve it, why not?
But why should you have? If you have,
because we have
a New York road from Lagos to Ibadan, and then all your major arteries, all the economic centers that feed into Lagos Ibadan are not motorable. I mean, see, the notion of development you should have is that development is about first the people. It has to be balanced. A road is not an end in itself. A road is a means to an end, and that end is end of economic growth, rural sectors, creating economy.
Isn't that where the local government comes in? I mean,
so the point I'm making is that if you're going to do these roads, they are emergency. Development is strategic. You have to think around, what does this road connect us to? Development is in phases. We can't finish this road this year, but if we go and take one massive road in nowhere that's not linked to economic activity, not linked. So I want them to proceed in a strategic sense, that these roads in the short to medium term, we do this road because they're going to generate X to us. Development is always continuous.
And it comes back to what Ngozi just asked, with the new move, the Supreme Court ruling on the local government. It's amazing that a lot of people didn't know that local governments were meant to build those roads, those artery roads. So now that it is coming to the local governments, perhaps it will also give less stress, put less stress on the federal government.
I want to disappoint you. Look, this judgment has terrible shortcomings. It's going to create a sense of multiplying centers of rent seeking. Look, the local governments are not happy. They're going to get their money. What's the mechanism? I would prefer, honestly, if you look at China, look at development elsewhere. Development is centrally orchestrated. You need a state governors who are responsible and accountable to use direct usage of those funds. For example, local government chairman who is now free to hold this money. How do you know that you're now multiplying 2 government houses into 21 in Imo State, for example? So there's one government house where you think money is wasted. They're going to have 21 mini government houses with no accountability framework. So I'm not too euphoric about this. You see, if you look at China, how did China, a country...
get to that bridge first before...
the point I'm making, don't build on the protocol changes. Build on administrative and process-based. Look, development requires some centralization. Development requires states. 21 local governments, no capacity, no even personnel, even human resources, weak. So
don't you think we should take baby steps? I mean, we can't.
I think the baby step for me. We should, but we shouldn't have this notion that once you multiply institutions, great institutions are not coordinated, that don't have capacity, you get development. Why is it that China is strategically using the center to incentive for regions to develop? And that's how China started. So I think we should be strategic, take steps, but don't be illusory. Don't be driven by this idea that, build infrastructure, build roads and airports everywhere, and then we will get development.
Well, I want to believe that this minister has demonstrated the level of capacity and thinking outside of the box. So
I'm a scholar, a critic. I don't want to accept
that's fine.
Say some,
Dr. Sam Amadi, thank you very much for joining us, Arise analyst and Lord.